If it's the 15th of the month, it's time to take a dive into my weird record collection.
Gentlemen, get the thing straight once and for all. The policeman isn't there to create disorder. The policeman is there to preserve disorder.
Ross Alhambra intersection at 15000. Contact Los Angeles Center, 2 minutes northeast of the...
Hi friends, welcome to episode number 6 of my weird record collection. I'm Sean, and I'm coming to you from Chicago. Oh, actually, if I did my job right, then I'm actually in London right now, assuming you're listening to this on the day of its release, June 15th, 2024. And consider this an invitation to my odd world of strange, miscellaneous, and otherwise uncategorizable media for your turntable. In this episode, we will be looking at a couple of records that you can use to spice up your 8mm home movies. Isn't that exciting? But first, my friends, I wanted to discuss some commentary about episode 5, which featured They're at the Post, a horse racing game from 1976 that included 4 12-inch multi-groove records that had 8 parallel grooves per side, each groove representing a horse race with a different outcome. And that would typically result in a random race being played back depending on what groove the stylus landed on when you played the record. Now, if you listen to this podcast regularly, you know that if a record I talk about is not on YouTube, I will put it on YouTube. Well, think about this, friends. 4 records, 8 races per side. So that's 16 races per record. That is 64 races. 64. Do you know what a pain in the butt it was to get all of those races recorded? When I went through record 1, side 1, Lady Luck was smiling on me because I was able to get different races 5 times in a row, but sometimes I wasn't so lucky. That's one reason when I released the episode, I did not yet have all the races up on YouTube, but right now they're finally, all 64 races are now on my YouTube channel. I organize them into playlists, 1 playlist per race, and each playlist has all 8 possible outcomes. The links to those playlists are in the show notes for episode 5, located on myweirdrecords.fab4it.com. Also, I did hear back from a few people about other parallel groove records. Mad Magazine, for example, was famous for issuing at least one of them. I believe it had 6 or 8 different songs. I knew about that one, but the episode was going to be long enough as it was, so I didn't feel like talking about every single parallel groove record I could find out about. Also, a few different bands over the years have released parallel groove singles so that when you played one side of the record, you didn't know what song you were going to hear. Literally the day after episode 5 came out, by the way, I released an extra video on YouTube, and I'm going to do that from time to time. The video was about part of my normal record collection, specifically covering different releases of the Beach Boys' 1966 album Pet Sounds that my wife Lisa and I have in our combined record collection. Well, I need to make a few corrections with that video. One, I actually added to the video in post-production. I said when I was talking about the album How to Speak Hip by Del Close and John Brent, I said that Del Close was the hipster and John Brent was the narrator. Well, I somehow got that backwards. Del Close was the narrator and John Brent was the hipster, and I should have known that. I mean, Del Close's voice is very familiar to not only me, but also many other Gen Xers, thanks to Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Also, I showed a 2-disc colored vinyl reissue of Pet Sounds, on which one record was mono, the yellow one was mono, the other, the green one, was stereo. I commented that while the stereo disc sounded really good, the mono disc sounded quite bad. Well, friend of the show Ferg, who by the way hosts the Atari 2600 Game by Game podcast, asked me if I had listened to that mono record since I got the Ortophon Blue cartridge that I talked about in an earlier episode, and I had not. I didn't. So I gave it a shot. I tell you, with that Ortophon Blue stylus and cartridge, that yellow mono Pet Sounds actually sounded fantastic. But you know what? With that album and the half-speed remasters of The Who's My Generation and Who's Next albums sounding no better than mediocre and the otherwise good Audio-Technica stylus it came with my ATLP 1240 turntable, I was kind of irked at the idea that to enjoy those records in the best quality, I needed to spend at least $186 on a stylus. But then I thought, these are audiophile pressings. Audiophile media require audiophile equipment. I'd hardly call my setup audiophile, but given that my stylus is significantly upgraded, and for the money that I paid for it, it does make my setup a little bit more audiophile than it normally would have been. Finally, let me give credit where credit is due. In that video, when I showed my copy of Mr. D's Machine, I said that I'd purchased it at Laurie's Planet of Sound, one of my favorite record stores in Chicago. Actually, I misspoke. I bought that album at Val's Holla, a record store in nearby Oak Park, and that place has been around forever. And I never went there until this past January, the same day, actually, that I first went to Beverly Records and bought there at the Post. Unfortunately, though, Val, the owner, she died a few years ago, but the rest of the staff keeps the store going strong, thankfully. Really nice place that I'm sure I'll be visiting many more times in the near future. So now that we've taken care of those goodies, let's take a look at this episode's featured records. Now, friends, when I originally planned this episode, I was only intending to talk about one record, but at almost the last minute, I discovered another record that was almost, at least format-wise, identical. So guess what? You're getting two for this particular episode. And of course, I like to take a deep dive into the records that I talk about, and whenever possible, talk about some history behind them. I'm going to start with background music and sound effects for your home movies. I think the easiest way to approach what I want to talk about is to start with how it ended up in my collection in the first place. I bought the record for $4.99 at Rattleback Records in Chicago on April 27th, 2024. I did see that record there before on Record Store Day. Didn't get it then, but I felt I needed to get it, especially because I had already planned this episode to cover that other record that's very similar. Lisa was with me at the time, and she agreed that I probably should get it. As I do with all the records that I talk about in this podcast, I checked to see if this album was posted on YouTube. It was not. So I took it upon myself to record it digitally so that I could share it on YouTube, which was quite an interesting experience. I did the digital recording of the record and cleaned up as much of the surface noise, scratches, pops, etc. as I could. As I was cleaning up track number 18 on side 2, titled Parade Effects, it occurred to me that I did not know what piece of music the marching band was playing. I wondered, would SoundHound be able to help me out? So I opened up the SoundHound app on my smartphone to see if it might recognize that march. And I got the most curious result. After listening to the track, SoundHound came back with something called Notre Fête Nationale, as recited by René Caron from a French-Canadian album called Les Poèmes de Jean Narache. And that album was released July 23rd, 2008. I Googled the album and was able to listen to the tracks online, and wouldn't you know it, that track, Notre Fête Nationale, featured a narrator reciting a poem, and in the background was the exact track from the background music album, complete with the exact same crowd noises. I was stunned. Someone else had a copy of this freaking album here. I still don't know the name of that march, though. If anybody can identify it, I would love to hear from you. Listen to the end of the episode to find out how to contact me if you don't already know. As I was uploading the tracks to YouTube, I noticed that a couple of them got tagged with copyright warnings. Mind you, the warnings explicitly stated that they weren't copyright strikes, but just a little indication that somebody owned the copyright but would allow it on YouTube, and ergo, my uploads would not be subject to any restrictions. But still, this is the first time I've ever experienced that with a record I've covered in this podcast. Keeping in mind that this podcast is only 6 episodes old, but still. And friends, in case I haven't mentioned this in a previous episode, you would be shocked at the rabbit holes you fall into when researching these odd records. Background music and sound effects for your home movies, the best I could gather, was released in 1967 on a label called Major Records. According to my research, Major Records, which has dozens upon dozens of sound effects and background music albums under its belt, that label was established in 1954 by Thomas J. Valentino Incorporated, which itself was founded by, wait for it, Thomas J. Valentino in 1932. The Major Records label existed until 1981, at which point all records under the Major label were released under the name Valentino Inc. And of course, this means we also have to take a dive into Thomas J. Valentino himself, but don't worry, I'm not going to go too deep with this one. Some of this information comes from his obituary in the August 6, 1986 edition of the New York Times. He was born in Sicily on April 27, 1907, and his family immigrated to the United States in 1911. It seems that Valentino always had his eye on music, as his career in music began in the 1920s as a piano and organ tuner. His clients were on steamships docked in New York City, interestingly. You never think of steamships having pianos and organs that needed to be tuned. In the 30s, before founding his own company, Valentino was a sales rep for the Gennett, that's Gennett, recording company. I tried not to get in too deep a dive with Gennett, but interestingly, I found that while that record label had many black artists, including Louis Armstrong, Fats Waller, and Duke Ellington, they also provided their services kind of in quiet to the Ku Klux Klan. Anyway, going back to Thomas Valentino, he started a sound effects company and provided sound effects for several Broadway productions, including Death of a Salesman, The Glass Menagerie, and The Diary of Anne Frank. Eventually, his sound effects collections were distributed to radio stations. I wasn't able to ascertain exactly when, but he served as a vice president for the Recording Industry Association of America, most likely in the 70s. And during that decade, he earned at least 2 Grammy Awards. One in 1978 for producing Walter Murphy's recording called A Fifth of Beethoven, which everybody in the universe who was alive at the time would remember from being included in the movie Saturday Night Fever and its companion soundtrack album, the latter of which Valentino also won a Grammy for as a co-producer, well, because his production of A Fifth of Beethoven is included. Walter Murphy, by the way, was very young at the time, and he started working with Valentino in 1974 and was interested in adapting rock music to work with classical works, such as what the Toys did in 1965 with A Lover's Concerto. But in the mid-70s, it had been a while since that had actually been done, so Walter Murphy wanted to give it a shot. Most of his work went ignored, but Valentino really liked what Murphy had done with The Fifth of Beethoven, so he pounded the pavement to get it released and eventually scored a win with Private Stock Records. Walter Murphy nowadays is the composer of the music used in the TV show Family Guy. Getting back to Thomas Valentino, I wasn't really able to find out anything about him past his Grammy Awards, except that he died on Monday, August 4th, 1986, at his home in Forest Hills, Queens, after a long illness. And since then, his library underwent changes in distributorship and ownership. In 2002, the Major Records catalog, along with the other Valentino properties, were reissued under the Evergreen Library, over 113 CDs. And by the way, CDs can contain between 70 and 80 minutes, so do the math as to how much stuff he had on there. A production music library company called Bug Music acquired the Valentino collection in November 2008 and released that catalog under its Select Tracks brand on a digital collection series called Valentino Vantage. In 2011, BMG Rights Management acquired the Valentino properties and still owns the rights to this day. So now that I gave you a little rundown on Thomas J. Valentino and his music library, let's take a look at the record itself. Again, it's called Background Music and Sound Effects for Your Home Movies. And what can I say? It delivers exactly what it promises. Side 1 contains a bunch of musical beds, and Side 2 is various sound effects, mostly sounding like they were live field recordings, with maybe one or two being studio creations. On side 1, the musical side, there are the following titles. Opening, newsreel opening. It really does sound like the beginning of a newsreel, but I honestly can't think of any real reason a home movie maker would ever use it. The next track, England, United Kingdom. That's one of those tracks that came up with the copyright warning on YouTube. It sounds like it's trying to be Rule Britannia without actually being Rule Britannia. The next track, Italy, Italia. That's another that had a copyright warning on it. France, Salute to France. Well, neither this track nor the previous one, Italia, would make you think of their respective namesakes. They're just generic sounding orchestral pieces that honestly could work with any geographic locale, or at least any European locale. Next, there's one called Pastoral, Birdling, which is a mellow orchestral piece with a fluttering flute, presumably meant to represent a little bird. Next track is called Sports, Ride and Surf. R-I-D-I-N' surf. Now, I am into surf music, Dick Dale and the Deltones, and whatever else have you, including modern surf bands like Messer Chups and the Surferjettes. Surf music, as you may or may not know, is instrumental music performed by a guitar combo with pounding drums and a lead guitar whose job it is to musically represent the feel of a wave as you ride it, or perhaps as it curls over you, causing you to wipe out. So, keeping that in mind, let's give a little bit of a listen to Ride and Surf. Now, my wife Lisa, whom you cannot keep away from a beach, and who grew up spending as much free time as possible at the Atlantic, is well aware of surf music and its purpose, and is also a big appreciator of it. I played her this track and asked for her comments. Here is what she had to say. So what do you think of Ride and Surf?
Now, what year is this from?
1967.
Oh my. I mean, if it was from, say, 1947, yeah, I could understand why somebody would put that on the record, but have these people never gone outside? Have they been locked in a room for many years? Have they never heard surf music? Have they ever seen the ocean? Have they ever seen a surfboard? Have they ever seen a person? I'm...
But you don't think Bruce Brown would use that to add to his films?
I mean, well, in The Endless Summer, there is some music that is not your typical surf garage band music. There is some music that is a little more orchestral, but it's very light. And it does fit well with the action. Like, this is way too heavy to really work on any level.
Even the non-surfy surf music in The Endless Summer still works.
Well, that's what I mean.
But it's
that's
not
what
like this. It's not this little Laurie Johnson happy-go-lively kind
like
of
this
thing.
sounds like music that would have been in a newsreel in England or something. It just, no. It's just, no. It's terrible.
Next, we have busy music, a light workout, and not much to say about that. Baby music, story of a child, whatever that means. Then we have children's music, and then parentheses, circus, and then elephants and clowns. Basically a lot of bassy brass, really. Then there's Birthday Party for Adults, which is just a rousing orchestral rendition of Happy Birthday. And after that, we have Birthday Party, and then in parentheses, Lullaby, and then For Baby. It's yet another orchestral Happy Birthday, but mellower, so as, I guess, not to disturb the child. The next track is called Wedding Music, Wedding March, and then in parentheses it says organ. This is the standard Here Comes the Bride wedding march from Wagner's opera Lohengrin, as performed on a pipe organ. After that, we have the other traditional, if not hackneyed, wedding recessional called Wedding Music Recessional organ, the well-known end of the ceremony piece composed by Felix Mendelssohn. Next, okay, I'm going to try not to rant too much here. The next track is titled Christmas Music, Jingle Bells, And it's just what you think. It's an orchestral rendition of Jingle Bells. Now, all right, that's it. I have to rant. I'll try to be quick, but I have to rant. Because I'm the person who I am, the title here irks me because not only is Jingle Bells not a Christmas song, notice that there's no mention whatsoever of Christmas in the lyrics anywhere, but it was intended to be a Thanksgiving song. Don't believe me? Look it up. Anyway, again, it's a very up-tempo orchestral rendition of James Lord Pierpont's classic. The last track on the musical side is called Closing, Newsreel Closing. And again, I have no idea what a home movie maker would do with this newsreel-y kind of thing. Last I knew, home 8mm cameras were not intended for making newsreels. Side 2, which is all sound effects, has the following tracks: jet takeoff, jet in flight, diesel train pulling into station, diesel train leaving station, diesel train running, boat whistle 1, boat whistle 2, harbor noises, traffic noises, children in a swimming pool, children playing, waterfalls, baby crying, baby cooing, baby laughing. All those are pretty much what they are. It's pretty straightforward. Now, the next track is called Confusion of Voices, Men. Now, while the other sound effects that I mentioned I think are pretty organic, I am pretty sure that Confusion of Voices was actually recorded in a studio specifically for the purpose of making a sound effects recording. It sounds to me like they're not actually really speaking any real language. They're just kind of muttering gibberish, really. Next, there's a track called Birds, which contains sounds of various types of birds chirping, tweeting, and cawing. And then you have Parade Effects. That's that track I was talking about that was on the record of French poetry. And finally, Carnival Effects, Background, which features carnival music, crowd noises, and the sounds of a shooting gallery. Now, getting back to how I recorded this record digitally so I could put it on YouTube, there was something that I noticed that was kind of strange. When I was editing the sounds, I noticed at the beginning of each sound, there was kind of a hum or something. I don't know if I'd call it a hum, but it was a very consistent noise. And I thought that it was basically just the sound of the motor from my turntable. The way that I digitize recordings, at least for the time being, is I use the USB output on my turntable. And the USB output is connected to the built-in preamp, which I never use when I'm just listening to records, but I have to turn the preamp on if I'm going to record from a record. And that preamp picks up every little move in that turntable. So there's a lot of motor noise. So if I'm recording something very quiet, I actually have to use noise reduction to filter it out. And sometimes the result's not all that good. But I was listening and I noticed that there's a lot of noise on here. It turns out it was not the motor noise from my turntable at all. The noise was actually part of the recordings. So it's strange. I don't know what that was all about, but yeah, all the recordings from the actual record have mechanical noises in them, mechanical hums in the background. So there's some kind of studio artifacting going on there. And also, remember I said that, as far as I could tell, the record was released in 1967. I'm pretty sure that at least some of the content was recorded much earlier than 1967, because they sound so old-fashioned. The audio quality is not of a 1967 studio recording. It would have sounded much better if it were recorded in 67. And especially that background music that they want us to use implicitly for pictures and movies of surfing. There's no way that anybody in 1967 would have used that as a surfing backdrop. There's no way. So I'm wondering, number one, when was this stuff actually recorded? And number two, is this the first time that all of the material was actually released? I have a feeling that given the vast number of Valentino recordings that existed and were reissued time after time, even though this record itself might have been published in 1967, I got that information from, I want to say Discogs.com, but it probably appeared on earlier compilations as well. I mean, for crying out loud, among the traffic noises is your old-fashioned auga type of horns. People didn't drive those kinds of cars in 1967. No way. I realize that this is primarily an audio podcast, except for those of you who are consuming this via YouTube, in which case are, of course, visual accompaniments. But for those of you who don't use YouTube for this podcast, I will describe the physical album itself. The record, it's black vinyl, white label, text, nothing special. But the front cover, at the very top, there's like a kind of an off-white stripe, a thin white stripe, about almost an inch wide, that has in blue text, Major Records presents, and then a banner, a black banner with white sans serif text, background music, all capital letters, and then all lowercase letters, and sound effects for your home movies. On the left, right below that, there's a picture of what I am assuming is a man, his wife, and their daughter, and they're all looking a little bit too excited, especially the mother, who has kind of that Brady Bunch Season 1 Carol Brady hairstyle, but it's more of a reddish-orangish tint. There is a film projector that they are all huddled around, and according to the back cover, the film projector is a Bolex SM8 magnetic sound projector for Super 8 movies. Oh, and the mom has a mug of something, some kind of brown liquid with a little foam around the top of it in a little ring. Could be coffee, could be tea, could be beer, could be root beer. I don't know. But anyway, off to the right, there's a simulated film strip that has a black and white picture of a Pan Am jet courtesy of Pan American Airways Incorporated. Right underneath that, there is a picture of an aircraft carrier. Both those pictures are in black and white, by the way. And underneath, there's kind of a half black and white, half color picture of the Arc de Triomphe. And below that, a color picture of pedestrians crossing a crosswalk to what appears to be the Colosseum, but I'm not sure. And under that, there's a picture of, some part of London. I don't know what part of London it is, unfortunately. I can tell that it's London. I feel kind of silly. But anyway, flip over to the back. It has the track listing and liner notes. It's all text here. I'm not going to read the whole thing here because, well, first of all, you can look it up on discogs.com and look at the back cover there. But a couple of highlights that I just wanted to kind of highlight, I guess. Pardon me for using the same word twice. But there's a little bit of hype text, such as soundtrack! A complete collection of background sound and music specifically designed for your home movies. So yeah, in case your home movies include a baby, a circus, a wedding, a trip to Italy, and footage of a diesel train, this is a great album for you, I guess. A major aid in making your home movie performance smoothly professional, ... And here's how to use this record with any movie camera you own. Now, this is interesting because, first of all, I should say that I told you this record is from 1967. You don't need to be told that if you actually have a copy yourself. It looks very 1967 on the front cover. But also, they pretty much admit that the content here is for dated materials because it says here, let's see. First, with the new Cinephonic cameras for indoor scenes which require special sound effect or a musical background, you can record straight from the record while shooting. Just, quote-unquote, plant the microphone near your record player and use the camera as you would normally. So I guess they are kind of hinting that this would work for a camera that also can record sound. Second, to introduce sounds or musical background with a standard camera, just decide in advance which bands will accompany highlights of your film. You'll find the individual selections quick and easy to spot. This record is as basic as your editing machine in turning out home movies that have feature film quality. If you haven't converted to sound home movies, you will enjoy using many of the effects and musical moods on this record with your silent 8mm films. So yeah, it's interesting. It's basically saying, well, if you're still using an old out-of-date camera, you can still use this record. So, that might explain some of those old-fashioned sounds I was talking about before. Okay, I'm going to read word for word what the little disclaimer here says. They're no re-recording charge for amateurs producing pictures for non-commercial and private showings. Yeah, there's no verb. There's no verb. Come on, people. Anyway, it goes on to say, for commercial purposes, re-recording clearance rights must be obtained from the copyright owner, Thomas J. Valentino, Inc., 150 West 46th Street, New York, 36, New York. Nowadays, that would be 10036, of course. So I sought out to get permission to use the sounds for this podcast, but unfortunately, I was not able to reach anybody, partly because it turns out that 150 West 46th Street is now Le Marais, which is a French steakhouse, so they weren't really able to help me. They were able to offer me a nice steak, though, so I do appreciate that. Now, that's interesting because the address, again, 150 West 46th Street for Thomas J. Valentino, Inc., but in the lower left corner, just not even 2 inches below that, it has in big letters, Thomas J. Valentino, Inc. Okay, cool. And then the next line, it has the address 151 West 46th Street, New York, 36, New York. What is it, 150 or 151? Or do they have 2 separate offices? For whatever it's worth, 151 West 46th is Baltimore Music Company, which appears to be a musical instrument store. If you need to buy or rent or consign a musical instrument in New York, right by Times Square, that's your baby, I guess. So now this record was produced in New York City. And for the next record, we're going to go across the Atlantic to England, specifically London, where I should be right now, assuming you're listening to this on release day. The name of the record is Custom Music for 8mm. You know, maybe rather than try to explain the record myself, I should leave it to the professionals. In the January 1966 edition of a British magazine called Tape Recorder, there's a brief write-up of the album in the magazine's New Products feature on page 28, and here's what it says, and I quote, "Theme and atmosphere music, with a selection of sound effects, are included on the gramophone record Custom Music for 8mm and produced by CDC Limited." And for whatever reason, they put the company's name in italics. Anyway, although intended for amateur cine use, as the title implies, the disc can be of value in sound recording and slide accompaniments. The record is divided into 3 opening pieces, 3 closing pieces, and some 20 general themes with such titles as Pomp and Pageantry, Circus and Masquerade, and Traveling and Locomotion. The latter half of the second side features 12 sound effects including railway, traffic, and sea effects, and closing with applause. No copyright fees are payable on the disc when used in the domestic circle beyond the initial cost of the disc. A descriptive leaflet is supplied giving advice on using the disc and typical applications. A band selector is also included to facilitate easy identification of each recorded track. The exact duration in minutes and seconds of each sequence is published on the record sleeve. So there we go. That was the description as seen in Tape Recorder magazine. Now, you heard me say the record was made by CDC Limited. Actually, the write-up shortened the name a little bit. The company listed on the album cover is actually CDC Company, well, CO period, Limited. Specifically, this comes from the photographic division of the company, whose address was listed as 460 Holloway Road in London, which currently is occupied by I Value Opticians and Holloway Hearing Center. Who exactly is CDC Company Limited? It was the commercial drug and chemical company, whose main address, by the way, was 190 Stamford Hill in London, and that location is currently an Emerald Shoes Limited store, and the 2 different addresses I gave you are about 3 miles apart. How in the world did a drug company release a record album of music and sound effects? I have no idea. I could not find out any information about this company. I really couldn't. But I can tell you this, they did not put out an album of music and sound effects. They actually did 3. There was also, from around the same time, around 1965, Cine Mood Music and sound for a picture evening. Now, included in the album, there was a ordering card, a little postcard where you could write in and order something. I don't know how they would collect it because this is not an envelope and there's nowhere to put your credit card number if they even had, really, if credit cards were even in common use back then. Maybe this was cash on delivery. I don't know. But here's what you could order from CDC Company Limited's photographic division. You could order the CDC 18-inch Custom Major 110 for £7, 17 shillings and 6 pence. I have no idea what that is. I'm guessing it's some kind of a screen. There's also the CDC 14-inch Custom Minor 100 for £6, 17 shillings and 6 pence. Again, I'm guessing that's a screen. Then there's the CDC 18-inch Custom Major 220 Deluxe for £18, 18 shillings and 0 pence. And the CDC 12-inch Custom Minor 200 Deluxe, which would run you £14 and 14 shillings. On the more expensive side, there's the CDC Custom Aluminium 500. I have no idea what that is. Might be a projector, might be a camera. I'm not sure, but the cost was £29 and 10 shillings. This was in 1965 British money, of course. There was the CDC Custom Aluminium 400 and the Aluminium 300, respectively, at £26 and 5 shillings and £21 also, respectively. And the Custom Universal Projector Case and Table 150, which would run you £3, 7 shillings, 6 pence. And you could also order any of the 3 records that I mentioned, all at £2, 9 shillings and 6 pence. Now, remember how I read that bit about how there's some helpful hints that are packaged with this record? Well, my copy has them too. CDC Custom Music General Instructions and Recording Guide. Basically, they're trying to make you look as much like a professional editor as humanly possible. They're taking this a little bit too seriously. They tell you how to prepare everything, how to edit if at all possible. They say use a tape recorder if you can and make sure that there are precise start points and end points in both the tape and in the film, the slides, whatever it is that you are using. Basically, they're trying to make you a professional editor. It gets pretty intense. I would love to read this whole thing, but man, it's 3 whole pages of 4 pages of instructions, actually, I think. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's on a cardboard fold-out insert here. And this is interesting here. It says here, the CDC custom music is designed to be used with imagination and initiative. The tracks may be applied much more widely than their titles imply. Some sections can be repeated without appearing obvious. Some can be combined for greater variety. Remember, sound adds realism and accentuates the visual presentation. Used subtly, it can create artistry, anticipation, suspense, drama, dignity, and romance without the need for title or commentary. The ability to make the best of this record, therefore, lies with you. And there are actually some suggestions as to what tracks on the album to use and in which sequence, too. Sound will set the mood for a scene. For example, opening bands 1, 2, 3, later come back to opening band for a climax, a technique often used by professionals where title music is used as a theme. And let's see, suggestion 2, sound will complete the correct setting, e.g. band 14 at Circus, band 13 at Fairground, even if you missed a shot of the carousel. Yeah, heaven forbid we don't get a shot of the carousel. Sound will interpret a scene to the audience, e.g. Band 8, Track A, will interpret a tranquil continental holiday scene, or Track B, feverish holiday activity with its bouncy sound. I mean, this is a helpful guide, don't get me wrong, but man, they seem to be taking themselves way too seriously. But I do appreciate the effort they put into this because, well, it shows that they were looking to not just make a quick buck, but also be as helpful as they can. And just as I did with the previous record, I'll go over the contents of this one. The cover, by the way, has At the very top of the front cover, a little single line of treble clef staff in 2/4 time with no key signature, so I'm guessing this is supposed to be key of C. Let's listen to what that staff would actually be playing if you were to actually play it. Here's a sample. I don't recognize that melody as being from anywhere in the album, and not only that, I have no indication as to how fast that was supposed to go. That speed was just 80 beats per minute, by the way. The cover has a kind of a cream color background, and it says custom music for in red letters, and then there's a big red box with the white 8mm in the upper right quadrant. And in blue text, it says, a background of music and sounds to build the right atmosphere for your film or slideshow. And then below that, there's a picture of two young-looking women and a young-looking man in a room with a film projector on a table, and they're obviously kind of in the dark. There's kind of a red hue in the picture. And then below that, there's a simulated film strip with 4 smaller versions of that same picture. You can use your own imagination as to what might have happened among that man and the 2 women with him. But anyway, the album contents, as it says on the lower right quadrant in blue text, 38 tracks consisting of moods, themes, and special sound effects. 3 film openings, ceremonial, soft and mellow, drama and mystery. 3 film closings, grand finale, movie-type finale, sweet and gentle. And then 14 themes, happy and exhilarating, holidays in the sun, gay and light-hearted occasions, traveling and locomotion, birthday party, pomp and pageantry, the fairground, circus and masquerade, sentimental mood, relaxation and playtime, here comes the bride, wedding, voluntary, wedding march, wedding bells. Also the following realistic sound effects: train, baby crying, crowd scene, traffic, dog barking, thunderstorm and rain, ships and seaside effects, applause. And the CDC logo is in the top left corner and the bottom left corner. You want to make sure that you know this comes from CDC. If you flip over to the back side, you get basically just notes about the record itself. It has the list of all those tracks that I just mentioned with a little bit more detail. For example, for the band Gay and Lighthearted Occasions, it's actually 2 parts. Part A, Vienna background, waltz type, continental party or atmosphere, train journey music, or continuous moving music, e.g. car journey, etc. For Part B, it says sophisticated jazz with piano, gay, cheerful, high-spirited, and jovial. So they give you a little bit more helpful information on each of the tracks. And then there is this warning. Notice to user. This record, because that's how they say it over there, may be re-recorded for private purposes, including use with amateur films and amateur film societies. For any use involving the professional performance of the musical works reproduced on these records, a license is required from the Performing Rights Society Limited. Now, I don't know if that applies to podcasts, number 1. And number 2, this record is from 1965. And not only that, but some of the tracks on here were published before 1965 at first. Some were done in 1957, some in 1964. But if I have my copyright rules down, and I'm not sure I do, then I should be able to use this stuff all I want because the 50 years has expired. So it should theoretically be public domain. None of the occurrences of these tracks on YouTube has a copyright notice of any kind whatsoever. So I should be in the clear, right? If I hear from anybody's lawyers, I will let you all know. But more about that a little bit later, by the way. I do want to read this little blurb that is on the top of the back cover. It says, complete instructions including how to use this record for successful sound film and slideshows. I don't think this is very complete, or else why would they include the that cardboard foldout too? But it says custom music for 8mm will help the movie maker and still photographer who wants a successful musical photographic show to produce to his best advantage. This record creates the correct atmosphere for your show by using music and sounds as used by professional movie and television productions. It offers show openings, closings, and themes, as well as sound effects to cover almost any sound contingency or situation. These can easily be re-recorded onto a magnetic soundtrack or tape, or can be played on any gramophone as background. Each band, although classified by a title, can in fact be widely used in an infinite combination to produce sound effects for all film situations that can arise. With imagination, one can widen the uses of these bands very considerably. So, yeah, look at that. Oh, speaking of the cardboard foldout, part of the cardboard foldout is, they call it a track selector, and there are instructions. Detach selector by tearing along the perforation. Pierce spindle holes as indicated and place over record player spindle to show beginning of each band. Now, whoever owned this record before I did not actually detach the selector. It's still intact. However, I do see that the spindle holes are punched out, assuming they ever were not in the first place. But this is actually a pretty handy little thing because there are so many tracks on the record that the bands are very narrow and it's very difficult to kind of count your way through just looking at the vinyl, trying to figure out which track is which. So if you were to put this track selector over the record and use the guides it has, it does make it a lot easier to select which band on the record you want to play. So this is actually a pretty handy little guide. If you go to the records entry on discogs.com, you can see what this foldout looks like. And also, if you watch the video version of this podcast on YouTube, you'll also see same as well. By the way, I do have to comment on something. There are a couple of tracks on here that are kind of similar to what's on background music and sound effects for your home movies. For one thing, both of these records include at least one version of Happy Birthday, and this one does too, the custom music for 8mm. The one on this record is more of a chimey version, like on a Celesta, so it's much mellower than the ones that are on the other album. And also, the wedding marches that are on the other record, there are versions of those on here as well, and that is on the 4-part track called Wedding, Here Comes the Bride. Part A is the Lohengrin music, and by the way, I did a little bit of a dive into the Lohengrin music. I mentioned before that that's from the opera Lohengrin by Wagner. Because seeing this come up twice got me a little bit curious, because I had always heard that if you were to get married in a church, many parishes, many churches will actually forbid using this. I had heard that it's because the actual music comes from a scene in the opera in which the couple is about to consummate their marriage, let's just say. So I wanted to read up about that and see if that's true, and that's not really true. The reason that in some religious institutions the music is not allowed is simply because of the fact that it comes from an opera, and therefore it's considered a little bit too showy for what should be a sacred ceremony. So a lot of religious institutions won't allow the Lohengrin, Here Comes the Bride, whatever they want to call it. They won't allow that. And in fact, even more unlikely to allow it is at Jewish ceremonies, because Wagner was apparently a big-time anti-Semite. So I can totally understand that. Another thing that's on this record in the wedding tracks is what they call voluntary. I wasn't familiar with this. It's an organ piece, but I looked it up on SoundHound, and apparently it is a piece called Air and Cavalte for organ in F major by Sir Stephen Cleobury. And I looked up a couple of recordings of that on YouTube, and that sure does match the description. And the next wedding track is the Wedding March by Felix Mendelssohn that I mentioned earlier, that's typically used as a recessional. There's a version of that. And next, there's a fourth wedding track. It's just a series of church bells, kind of playing a descending scale in F major, really. So there's a little bit of commonality here. There's a traffic sound effect, as I mentioned before. Now, this record is a little bit more reasonable in that terms, because The traffic sounds on this record are a lot less dated than on background music and sound effects for your home movies, because you don't hear that ooga sound effect on this. I will say this, though. The sound effects on this record are slightly lower quality than on the other one. The recording itself sounds a little bit more professionally done, because something I didn't mention is that on the previous record I talked about, the sound effects just suddenly come to an abrupt stop. On this record, custom music for 8mm, they fade out gracefully, so they're handled much better. And also, they don't have that background noise of some kind of motor humming or whatever that was that I talked about before. And there we have it. That is custom music for 8mm. Same purpose as the background music and sound effects record. Almost kind of the same division of labor in terms of music and sound effects, although it's much more heavier on music on this record than on sound effects. And as you probably know, if you're a regular listener, that I like to rate the records that I review in this podcast. Before I get to that, I'm going to share Sean's record collecting thoughts. For this episode, my record collecting thoughts are going to be based actually on something I found out when recording the previous episode, when I was talking about They're at the Post. During the course of prepping that episode, I learned the unfortunate fact that record number 4 of They're at the Post was warped, and it was not playable, because if I tried to play it, the tone arm literally was airborne. Luckily, about a year ago, I invested in a device called Record Pi. This is not meant to be an advertisement. I was not paid or asked to talk about it. I'm just telling you about my experience with it. Record Pi is a pretty expensive device. I was actually able to get it on a pretty hefty discount. In short, it's a record flattener. It's a very heavy piece of metal that fits inside something that kind of resembles those pizza delivery boxes that you see, that they stick the cardboard boxes in, only much smaller. The Record Pi comes with some felt pads, and you put the appropriate felt pad down onto the device itself. Then you put the record down over the spindle, and then you put another felt device on top of that record. You put the top of the Record Pi down, and you tighten it up with a little, I don't know what you call this thing. It's a typical tool thing, but I don't know, a little doohickey. There's also a washer to make sure there's a little tighter fit. Basically, you turn on the Record Pi and you wait a couple of hours, turn it off, and then let it cool down. The default temperature, and this is the temperature they recommend that you at least start with, is 125 degrees. It's a weird little setup because you plug the Record Pi into a box that has a thermostat on it, and then you plug that box into your main power supply. You can adjust the temperature up to a certain maximum. I don't know what it is, unfortunately. And you can control it through an app that you download called Smart Life. That way, if you want to go walk the dog, you can do that and keep an eye on what's going on with your Record Pi. If the temperature gets too hot, you can turn it off from wherever you are. And that's a pretty handy little thing. Now, here's what happened. I heated it actually at 135 degrees Fahrenheit for about 2 hours, and didn't really make much of a difference. You are told that you might have to go through multiple bakes. So I went through 4 more 4-hour bakes. They do tell you might have to bake it for longer. So I tried 4 different 4-hour bakes. Still didn't do much. Side 1 of record 4 wouldn't play without the tone arm jumping. Side 2, however, with race number 8, played through with no problem. I actually got to the point where side 2 played back fine without any adjustment to the counterweight. But side 1, I really needed to turn that counterweight, so it added a lot more weight to the tracking force, which I really didn't want to do. Then it occurred to me, the Ortofon Blue stylus that I had attached on there, the instructions tell you to set the tracking force to 1.8 grams. The stylus that it replaced, the Audio-Technica house brand stylus that came with the turntable, is rated at 3.5 grams. So I switched the styluses. I actually have separate head shells for each, so it was pretty effortless. I put in the stylus that shipped with the turntable, adjusted it to 3.5 grams of tracking force, and both sides played through perfectly. So I was quite happy. The record is still not perfectly flat, but it just shows that, yeah, the record Pi can work at least to an extent. Your mileage may vary. It depends on how stubborn the warp is. It depends on the material the record was made of, how malleable the vinyl itself is. There's so many determining factors. If this were a music record, I'd probably not be very happy because there'd still be some flutter and wow that I wouldn't be able to handle. But since There at the Post is primarily spoken word, wasn't a big deal. It's playable, it's listenable, and if you heard any of the samples that I put on YouTube of races 7 and 8, you really can't tell that there's a warp, unless you have even fussier hearing than I do. I will put a link to the Record Pi site on this podcast's website at myweirdrecords.fab4it.com. I'll link it both in this episode's show notes and in the Stuff I Recommend tab at the top of the site. What you want to do is hover over Stuff I Recommend and then go to Accessories. Or you can go to recordpi, that's pi.com. Having said all that, am I getting any kickback for saying this? Am I getting any cut of the purchase you might make from this? No, I'm not. It's just one of the actually several record flattening options out there. So go on YouTube, watch some reviews and demonstrations, and see what you like if you want to take a stab at flattening records. And by the way, a lot of people recommend, well, just put the record between a couple of glass plates, put them in your oven for 120 degrees for about X amount of time and be done with it. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't have oven-proof glass plates just laying around that can fit a record. So my real option was to get a record flattener. It was expensive. Thankfully, I got it for a discount. Record Pi is very expensive. I'm going to give you that warning right now. But hey, if you really want to invest in something that might make your warped records at least playable, give it a shot, check it out, or check out one of the other record flattening devices that are out there. If you do have any kind of record flattening device, whether it be Record Pi or another brand, or perhaps you use the stick your record in an oven method and it works for you, hey, let me know. Send me an email, reach out to me on the social media. For those of you new to this podcast, and I guess review for those of you who aren't, I like to rate the records that I talk about in this podcast on 5 individual categories: local interest and or usefulness, depending on whether or not the record itself is of any particular interest to any locale; historical interest; uniqueness, and yeah, I've talked about this in a previous episode, how really you're either unique or you're not. There's no in between, but hey, we can fudge the rules of the English language a little bit. Weirdness, of course, and enjoyability. Each of those gets a rating between 1 and 5 inclusive. Of course, the higher the rating, the better it is in each of those categories. And then I total them all up so each record could have a total cumulative score of anywhere between 5 and 25 inclusive. Now, I'm going to rate both of these records on each category at the same time rather than do one, go back and do the other, especially because there is a little bit of comparison going on here. Background music for your home movies, for usefulness, not local interest. There's nothing local about either of these records, but for usefulness, I'm going to have to give background music for your home movies a 2. And I don't know, it might be because here I am, a Gen Xer who grew up in the era of camcorders and eventually smartphones and stuff, so that everybody had easy access to full motion video with sound. Maybe I'm looking at it through a eye that is, how shall we say, tainted by technology. But I stand by my rating of 2. And I'll tell you why. It's mostly because even though the record came out in 1967, the contents are very dated. Again, with that weird interpretation of what surf music is supposed to sound like, I guess, ride and surf. By the way, I did entertain the thought that that particular track might have been titled something differently at some point. So I did a sound hound on it and got no results. So I tried Shazam. Shazam gave me a result from the Valentino library called Riding, no apostrophe, surf. So yeah, they always considered it to be surf. In fact, what you want to do now, pause the podcast and go to YouTube, go to the upload of Ride and Surf that I put up there. I'll link it in the show notes at myweirdrecords.fab4it.com. I took some video of surfers at Ocean Beach in San Francisco, and I put Ride and Surf in the background. Tell me how useful it makes it look. I showed that video to Lisa, and all she could say was, "Get that out of my face." And again, with the traffic sounds and the auga, come on, you're not fooling anybody in 1967. If these sounds had been updated, if they had a more fresh-sounding library for 1967, I'd definitely give this a higher rating. How about custom music for 8mm? Well, to test the usefulness on this one, I took some pictures from my spring break trip this year to New York City, and behind them I put the track Traveling and Locomotion, specifically Part A. It's used for any form of transportation, trains, cars, aeroplanes, etc., according to the back cover here, but I figured maybe a trip to New York City might help as well. Again, pause the podcast now and watch the video that I put on YouTube, and the link again is in the show notes, and you'll see what I mean, how it kind of works. Now, for custom music for 8mm, I gave 3 for usefulness. And the reason being is, yeah, it's definitely more useful and a lot less dated than background music for your home movies, but still, I don't know. I think it's more like you're trying to sell something to people that they don't need. Think about this in reality. Do you like having people thrust pictures upon you? Can you imagine in 1965 when this album came out, you go to somebody's house, "Oh, let me show you some home movies." You're going to be like, "Oh, God." Then you have a record like this providing the soundtrack instead of people just saying, "Okay, here's what's going on here." And even then, when you have the occasion in which somebody really does want to see your home movies and your slideshow and everything, it's probably not a good idea to have all this stuff planned out and choreographed and timed and edited, because what's going to happen? Somebody is going to say, "Hey, what's this thing back there in the background?" And you might have to stop and explain it. That'll throw off the timing a little bit. But I will concede that it is useful, but not necessarily for CDC Company Limited's intended purposes. I use many of the tracks from this record on this podcast. The transitional music you hear between segments, that is all from custom music for 8mm. Off the top of my head, I can tell you that Sweet and Restful and Holidays in the Sun play a small part in this podcast. Moving on to historical interest, I rated both records a 4 because these records are both a time capsule of mid-1960s and perhaps before. Listening to the sounds and the quality of the engineering and everything, there's no question that these are not modern recordings. And these records were made for something that was a thing back in the 60s, really. Again, these days with sound recordings and people have been making sound home movies on much higher quality for 40 years plus at the time of this podcast. So this is definitely of historical interest. How about uniqueness? I didn't quite know how to rate this. For background music for your home movies, I said 3. The concept of having a record providing musical themes and sound effects that you integrate with your home movies and slideshows, I don't know if that was necessarily a unique idea for back in the 60s, but it's not the most common thing in the world either. So for background music for your home movies, I kind of got wishy-washy and put 3. For custom music for 8mm, I gave it 4 for uniqueness because, well, it did have a special feature in that it included a very detailed guide as to how to edit and a little band selector guide that you stick on the spindle of your turntable itself. And of course, that contributed to my rating custom music for 8mm higher for usefulness a little bit. Also contributing to this decision to rate this a little bit higher than background music for your home movies, admittedly, is because of my America-centric attitude here. And I can't help it. I live my entire life in the United States. So to me, the fact that this is a British record kind of helps its uniqueness rating for me. And that it was produced by a drug company too. Over to weirdness, I rated both records a 2. They're not really all that weird. What would be weird about them is just the fact that you would voluntarily buy them in the 21st century, because there's no need for them other than curiosity and maybe to do a podcast. As for enjoyability, this was a difficult factor to rate on because, well, these records were not meant to be enjoyed. There's a function with them. You're supposed to, like I said, integrate them with your slideshow presentations and your home movies. So you're not going to pop these on the turntable just to listen to them. They are good for a laugh, I suppose, if you like to listen to kind of twee, tacky, very dated, very grown up, if you will, music. For background music for your home movies, I rated enjoyability a 2. What kind of turned me off is, again, how out of touch and out of dates a lot of the musical cues sounded, and even some of the sound effects too, just didn't quite, I don't know. And also the sound quality, I would say. I mentioned before about how the sound effects in this album, they suddenly cut off, they don't fade out gracefully, and it's kind of jarring. So enjoyability took a hit on this. For custom music for 8mm, I rated enjoyability a 3. I don't really know how much I could attach an enjoyability factor on these records, but custom music for 8mm definitely didn't have the same turnoffs, let me just put it to you that way, that background music for your home movies did. So in review, background music for your home movies. For usefulness, I rated a 2, 4 for historical interest, 3 for uniqueness, 2 for weirdness, 2 for enjoyability. And adding all that up, that gives background music for your home movies a score of 13, which makes it tied with tuning your auto harp for the lowest ranking on my Weird Records chart, which means I have to come up with a tiebreaker. Easily tuning your auto harp wins that tiebreaker right there, meaning that background music for your home movies so far is my lowest ranked record. Custom music for 8mm, just to review, 3 for local interest, 4 for historical interest, 4 for uniqueness, 2 for weirdness, 3 for enjoyability. That adds up to 16, which places this record 1 notch above Auto Harp for Students and Educators, and 1 notch below the self-titled album by the Singing Johnson family. So, that was everything I could tell you about custom music for 8mm, and background music and sound effects for your home movies. Friends, do you have any thoughts on these records or anything else relevant to this podcast? Well, before I tell you about next month's episode, I'll tell you where you can send your thoughts and, of course, give credit where credit is due. My email address is myweirdrecords@fab4it.com. Fab4it is spelled F-A-B, the number 4, I-T. Or you can reach out to me on the various social networks, such as Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, where my handle is My Weird Records. You can look for this podcast on Facebook. Simply do a search for My Weird Record Collection or go directly to facebook.com/myweirdrecords and do not collect $200. This podcast can also be accessed on YouTube, where you'll find not only episodes of this podcast, but also, whenever possible, complete audio of the records that I discuss and occasional bonus videos concerning both my weird and not so weird record collections. You can just go to YouTube and search for My Weird Record Collection or go directly to youtube.com/@My Weird Record Collection. Special thanks goes out to Tim Christ, aka Shoebox, for letting me use his record, the Pac-Man EP, as the basis for the logo for this podcast. Tim and his wonderfully entertaining and comedic music can be found on his website at worm-quartet.web.app. Special thanks also goes out to Kevin Zerb for designing the logo artwork for this podcast. My buddy Kevin and his music and podcasts are available on the web at zerbinator.com. Also, thanks to my wife Lisa for offering her commentary on Ride and Surf. Sounds and music used in this podcast remain the properties of their respective copyright holders and are used for the purposes of review and commentary. No infringement is intended. Told you I'd tell you about what's coming up next, so for next month, because it's July, it's summer, it's the height of travel season, I'm going to talk about a record that could be handy for road trips, especially if you live in the 70s. Until then, this is Sean reminding you, support your local record store. Thank you for listening.
We're down, we're gone, bye-bye.
I'm actually in London right now, assuming you're listening to this on the day of its release, June 15th, 19. Oh my goodness, no.